Welcome to this video in which I'm going to be discussing the concept of rudimental rolls or measured rolls. This is a specific rudimental application of double stroke rolls comprising a determinate number of double strokes and an accent or two accents. This is very common in the rudimental repertoire and it comprises a rudimental concept. So it's well worth understanding what we're talking about here. When I teach rudimental repertoire to some of my students, we often encounter confusion when we come across these rolls in the scores, not necessarily because the student is unable to play the roll, but because there is a certain challenge in recognizing them in the notation and discerning exactly how long we're supposed to be playing for and how fast. So these are the main concepts that I'm going to be discussing today. A measured roll is a rudimental concept comprising a predeterminate number of double strokes and an accent. This might be a 5-stroke roll, which contains 5 strokes, a 7-stroke roll containing 7, a 9-stroke roll, or even longer. I think it goes up to something like 15, 17, or 9-stroke rolls in the common lists of rudiments. But actually, as a concept, it can be any length, in theory. This is kind of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to approach this today from two sides. I'm going to come at this from the technical aspect of how we actually play these rolls and from the notational aspect of recognizing them within the repertoire. Because as I say, many of my students and many people generally struggle in recognizing the roll. They may see it's a roll, but as I've said, may not be sure how long they're supposed to play or how fast. So to begin with, let's clarify what we're talking about when we say a measured roll or a rudimental roll. Well, as I've said, there is a determinate number of double strokes and an accent, or there might sometimes be 2 accents, which we will come to shortly. So to demonstrate this, let's start really simply with a 5-stroke roll. Unsurprisingly, as the name suggests, it comprises 5 strokes, and this consists of 2 sets of double strokes, right, left, left, or left, right, which is 4 strokes, and an accent at the end, which is our 5th. It might sound something like this. We can quite clearly hear the 5 strokes there. We've got 2 sets of doubles on each hand, 2 sets of doubles across both hands, and then the accent at the end. And you can hear the familiar sound, the familiar characteristic of that 5-stroke roll. Now that is the typical application of a 5-stroke roll, although we can of course begin with the accent as well. It doesn't change how we actually play the roll, it just changes the location of the accent within the bar. We might find the accent is on the beat, or we might find the accent is off the beat, or somewhere else within that subdivision. It doesn't really matter as long as we are recognizing the 5-stroke roll as that set pattern of 2 sets of double strokes and an accent, whether or not that accent is at the beginning or the end. With that established, we can quite easily take this up to a 7-stroke roll simply by adding an extra set of double strokes. So this might run left, right, left, which is 6 strokes, and then a right at the end making 7, or right, left, right. And then we can hear one common application of the 7-stroke roll. I think we start to get the idea now. If we extend this to a 9-stroke roll, we get 4 sets of doubles, 2 on each hand before the 9th stroke accent. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So in theory, once we've got this established, as I've hinted at, we can take this up to any particular number. If I want to do a 15-stroke roll, I just work out how many double strokes I need. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, then a 15th stroke on the end. And I've got my 15-stroke roll. Now, I talked about having some measured rolls with 2 accents. You'll notice so far that everything we've discussed has been odd numbered. A 5-stroke roll, a 7-stroke roll, a 9-stroke roll, a 15-stroke roll. If we want an even-stroked roll, we actually just add a second accent. So a 6-stroke roll in this context, this rudimental context, is a 5-stroke roll with an extra accent on the end. Now again, it doesn't really matter where we place the accents. The permutations are quite varied here. We might have both accents at the beginning, the accents in the middle, the accents at the end, maybe the accents at the beginning and the end. There are other alternatives, but these are the basic ways that they appear in much of the rudimental repertoire. Again, we can create an 8-stroke roll by taking a 7-stroke roll and adding a second accent. A 10-stroke roll, we add one to the 9. Etc. Now notice when I'm performing these, the accents have a value double that of the double strokes. So if I'm playing the double strokes as 32nd notes, those accents are usually 16th notes, or they might sometimes be 8th notes. It all depends on the application. But traditionally, typically, those accents have a longer note value than the double strokes. This is one of the determining characteristics of the traditional rudimental rolls, or the traditional measured rolls. So now that we have a general idea as to what these measured rolls are, we need to talk about how they're applied and specifically how we recognize them in the repertoire. Now, crucially, these measured rolls serve a function, and that is to transition between accents. There are a few varied and ingenious ways in which these measured rolls have been applied in the repertoire over the years, but typically, on a simple level, these rolls are transferring us between the accents. So it stands to reason that the longer the roll, the larger the gap between the accents. If we have consecutive 5-stroke rolls, those accents are all going to be close together. And as we extend the rolls, if we take that to a 9, quite simply, those accents just become further apart, and there is a longer roll in between, which kind of serves as a texture. So we can create these sort of figures where you hear the accents coming in at different intervals, and actually what I'm doing is just combining different stroke rolls, 5s, 7s, 9s, again being the most typical. Now, when we want to try to recognize these in the notation as they appear in the repertoire, we need to understand 2 things. Every measured roll, as it appears in a piece in notation, comprises a note value, which determines the duration of the roll, and a subdivision, which determines how fast we actually play the strokes. When we can clearly understand both of these things, we're in a position to recognize the roll as it appears on the paper, and that lets us play the correct roll. So let's discuss the first of those, the duration. Whenever we see a roll in the notation, it comprises a note value with a certain number of slashes through it called strike-throughs, and this is how we recognize the roll. Now the one we're concerned with first of all is the note value itself. This might be an 8th note, this might be a quarter note, this might be a dotted half note. It doesn't really matter. The note value is telling us the duration of the roll. Now this actually serves multiple purposes, because not only does it tell us the duration of the roll, it tells us the position in the beat in which we're actually supposed to begin the roll. So let's assume that the roll begins on the first beat of the bar and is written as an 8th note. Well, we know that we are going to begin our roll on the first beat of the bar, and we're going to play the roll for the entire duration of that 8th note. That is going to take us up to the following and. 1 and. Our roll is going to fill all of that space. Now, in order to determine the subdivision, we need to look at the number of strike-throughs it possesses. And the easiest way to think of this is each strike-through adds a tail or a beam to what is already there. So in our example, we've got an 8th note. How do we know it's an eighth note? We recognize the eighth note because it has a single tail, which becomes a single beam when we connect it to another note. So if we add 2 strike-throughs to the eighth note, that takes the total number of tails or beams to 3. A note value with 3 tails or 3 beams is a 32nd note, and this gives us the subdivision that we are actually going to play. So armed with these 2 pieces of information, an eighth note with a subdivision of 32nd notes, we can put this together to derive the role we're actually about to play. What we then have to say is, I'm going to play 32nd notes to the duration of 1/8 note. So it's a simple conversion. How many 32nd notes in an eighth note? 4. This means that in the duration of our eighth note, we can fit 2 sets of doubles, right, right, left, left, or left, left, right, right, to the value, to the duration of that eighth note. This suggests that the next note on the and of the beat is going to be the accent, creating the 5-stroke roll. The way I would count this is to essentially count the 16th notes within the 8th note and to double each one. 1 E. We know the next stroke is going to be the and. 1 E and. And there is our 5-stroke roll. By looking at both the note value and the strike-throughs, we are able to determine exactly how fast we're going to play and for how long. Let's look at another example. Here we have a quarter note. So the quarter note is our starting position. We know that we are going to play a roll to the duration of an entire quarter note. If we count this as 16th notes, we would have 1 E and A. We have all of that space to fill with our double stroke roll. We then look at the number of strike-throughs. Well, a quarter note doesn't have any tails or beams. It is just the stem on its own. So when we see 3 strike-throughs on our quarter note, we add 3 tails or 3 beams to that quarter note. Again, as before, that takes the total number of tails up to 3, which suggests 32nd notes. So as before, we can do a simple act of conversion. How many 32nd notes in a quarter note? And the answer is 8. This is just double the previous one. So where previously for the 8th note, we could fit 2 sets of doubles, 4 32nd notes. Now we can double that. We can fit 4 sets of doubles, 8 32nd notes, 1 E and A. And we've played the roll to the duration of 1 quarter note. Again, this suggests a 9-stroke roll because we finished the quarter note. The next note on the next beat of the bar is going to be the accent. 1 E and A 2. There's our accent on the next beat. Let's look at another example now, a slightly more difficult one. In this example, we have a dotted 8th note which follows a 16th note. So we can see now we are no longer beginning the roll on the beat nor on the and, we are beginning the roll on the second 16th note of the beat. That accent at the beginning is just a single 16th note. So we have a duration of a dotted 8th note with 2 strike-throughs. Well, the dotted 8th note already has 1 tail, or a single beam, and we've added 2 to that. So once again, the total number of tails is 3. This again suggests 32nd notes, so we have to discern how many 32nd notes are in a dotted 8th note. Well, a dotted 8th note is worth 3 16th notes. In this instance, it would be E and A, and each of those divides to become 2 32nd notes, E and A. So we get 3 sets of doubles, 1 E and A, 1 E and A, and we have a particular application of the 7-stroke roll. Now, typically, within the repertoire, there is a standard. There are things that are very, very commonly employed. When we look through Wilcoxon and Pratt and others, we find the same things again and again. The 5-stroke rolls as 8th notes with 2 strike-throughs. The 9-stroke rolls as quarter notes with 3 strike-throughs. The 15 and 17-stroke rolls with half notes with 3 strike-throughs. These are the things that occur again and again and again, and they become very, very easy to spot. However, there is also the issue of the concept itself. So in more contemporary repertoire, some of my own work, people like Joe Tompkins are especially good at this. You can take the concept and expand it further. So for example, in one of my pieces, which I actually dedicated to Joe, the tempo is very, very slow, around about 58, 54, something like that, BPM. That meant that I was able to use actually smaller note values to create longer rolls. So even though I might have an eighth note, I would add 3 strike throughs, which takes the total number of tails to 4, meaning 64th notes. And this actually means that that eighth note can now fit in a 9-stroke roll rather than just a 5-stroke roll as it appears in the traditional work. So there are certainly ways in which we can apply this based on the context. We don't have to stick to this traditional application. However, if we are working on the traditional collections, the Pratts, the Wilcoxons and the like, we are going to see 5-stroke rolls as eighth notes, 7-stroke rolls as dotted eighth notes or eighth note triplets. We're going to see the 9-stroke roll as the quarter notes, as I say. But there are ways to subvert this depending on the composer, depending on the tradition, depending on the style. As I say, someone like Joe Tompkins is especially good at using unusual applications of these measured rolls that nevertheless follow that same principle. The duration plus the number of strike throughs determines how fast we actually play, the number of strokes we actually play. So I hope this has given you some insight into this concept. I would really encourage you all, of any ability, of any variety, of any style, to explore some of the rudimental repertoire, because it really is fantastic and it will really open your understanding up to some new concepts, some new applications, and it's just really fun to play as well. So I hope this has made some sense to you. Feel free to get in touch as always with any questions you may have, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you very much.